So I encourage people as they come in to go ahead and open your chat page and put in your name and where you're from. We'd love to see where everyone is from. And I want to welcome you all to the session of Flashing Your Brights with Otto Schultz. He's going to teach us how to address addiction in the faith community and in the community. And I'm Pastor Ed Treat. If you don't know me, I'm the director, the founder of the Center of Addiction and Faith. And this was all started because, gosh, Otto and I go back a long ways, but we're part of a fellowship that's been trying to raise awareness in the church for 30 years now. And it's just been in these last few years we're finally finding that people are open to this discussion. And so we're really delighted that so many are. The thought that we would have 52 people register for a session like this, even 6 years ago, would have been unheard of. And so it's really great to see a growing body of people interested in this topic and ready to take it on because it's a big problem. It's the number one problem facing the country right now. I'm going to introduce Otto in just a second and just tell you a couple things that are coming up and probably say a prayer because we don't want to not have a prayer. We have our conference coming up October 17th through 19th. And if you don't know about that, Katie's going to put a link to the website in the chat page for you so you can have a look at that conference. It really is our most fully loaded content. This is our sixth, and it has the most content of any conference we've done, and it's all virtual, so you can take it in from the comfort of your own home. But we have really some great speakers, some really great breakout sessions, and really encourage you to come to that and invite your folks. Bring a team from your church if you're a church leader. But that conference is, I got to fly here. That conference is I'm really excited about it, more so than I've ever been. Tomorrow we have a webinar at noon with Amanda Sharp, and she is an expert in motivational interviewing. And if you don't know what that is, it's a way of guiding people in a positive way toward making better choices in life. And rather than scolding them or Otto knows a lot about this. He may touch on it a little bit, but motivational interviewing tomorrow with Amanda Sharp. And then, yeah, I think that's all I'm going to tell you about. I have other announcements, but I don't want to spend all my time doing that. So I want to introduce our speaker today, but let me say a quick prayer first. The Lord be with you.
So with you.
Gracious God, we're so grateful for this opportunity to come together from all across the country. What a miracle it is that we have this tool and this gift that we can do this kind of work. We're really excited about the potential it gives us. Thank you for the Center of Addiction and Faith and for the work that we're doing here, that we can drive this conversation and raise awareness and reduce stigma and help save some of those lives out there of those people who are dying and suffering. And it isn't just about those who die, but it's the family members, it's the loved ones, it's the community, all who suffer. We want to help with that. We want to relieve it. We want to heal it. And so we pray for your Holy Spirit to bless our work, to bless our time here in this course, bless Otto and his words, inspire him, and lead us on to wonderful work in this field. Thank you for this field to work in, and we praise you for your love and your grace. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so our teacher is Otto Schultz. I knew I could get that out. How about that for slaughtering a name? Grateful to have Otto. He and I go back he preached at my church in Nebraska 26 years ago, I think. And he's been doing this for 40 years in the field. He's got 40 years of experience doing alcohol counseling and guiding people and teaching. He's a graduate of Concordia Seminary at St. Louis. He's been, like I said, in the field for 40 years. His primary ministry was as the spiritual counselor at a treatment center. He's trained thousands of people in practical tools for addressing substance abuse problems and coached many families in successful interventions. He is a failure at retirement, however. He can't seem to be done. He keeps working. He's worked for 6 years with Faith Partners, with Drew Brooks over there at Faith Partners. And what they do is work with congregations and communities to develop teams to take on addiction in their congregation. And so he's also serving as the executive director for the Center of Restoration of Behaviorally Impaired Clergy. He's got 2 kids, and he loves dogs, and he plays a lot of pickleball. That wasn't on here. I just threw that in. Anyway, really glad to have you, Otto. Excited to have you share your wisdom and guidance. So go ahead and inspire us.
Okay, thank you, Ed, and thank you all for being here. Okay, there's the share screen. Come on. Okay. And we want to do this. I know I should have this all ready to go, but I'm not sure how to do that. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome. And I would like you to put something in the chat, and I'm hoping there's some way we can record the chat so that you say some question you have about alcohol, drug issues, and pastoral care and so forth, or something you know about it. So I'm really counting on everybody to participate in this little exercise, and I'm hoping we can get it so that I can see this, what your comments and questions are in between sessions, so that I get a feel for where this group is and kind of what you may know and what you may not know. But it really is kind of a requirement for everybody to participate in this, because come on, folks, either you know something or you don't. So, you know, you have a question or share something you know, and it does not have to be profound, the something that you know. I know my father was a drunk. That would be something that you knew, okay? So you can say things like that. Basically, in this, and Ed's already put that up on the screen, but what I need to know, of course, is like who you are, where you're from, and what you want, and that's what I'm trying to get to. I was flying with my brother-in-law some time ago, and we were coming in for landing, and he got on the mic and he rattled off a bunch of stuff. And I said, gads, Roland, how do you remember all that? And he says, it's simple. Tell them who you are, where you're from, and what you want. And that's all I'm asking you to share is who you are, where you're from, and what you want. Okay, please, if I say something offensive, it will not be the first time. And if I say something offensive, please don't walk away. Please don't be angry. Just assume that it has to do with my ignorance about some sensitivity. And so use the chat or in some way or other, reach out, maybe an email later to educate me, okay? And try to be specific too, what it was that I said that was offensive or inappropriate, and so on. Okay. All right, we're going to talk most of this next 45 minutes or so. We're dealing with understanding substance use disorders from the perspective of pastoral care, not from the perspective of a scientist or a licensed counselor. So I'm going to talk about what the logic is behind the understanding of alcohol and drug dependencies being a disease in the ordinary sense of the term, how that relates to personal responsibility, decision-making, sin, if you prefer. And those things all tie together with addiction. And then what I talk about is the spiritual piece of that, which is dependency. Okay, I use dependency to talk about the spiritual piece. The logic of the disease. Okay, suppose you're in your office and the hospital calls you and says, Mr. Jones, a neighbor of yours has just been admitted, and not a neighbor, a member of your congregation has just been admitted to our emergency department. Mr. Jones has had a heart attack. His family's down here. They're very upset. They need some help. Could you come down here and support the family? Well, sure you could. So you're on your way down to the hospital and you're thinking, boy, this is about the third heart attack Jones has had. All right, you do what you can for the family and so on. Now, on another occasion, the hospital calls you and says, Mrs. Smith has been admitted to our emergency department. Her family's here. They're upset and they're asking for you. Could you come down here to support the Smith family? Of course you could. So you go on your way to the hospital and you're thinking, boy, I think Mrs. Smith has been in treatment for alcohol dependence twice before. Now you get to the hospital, you do what you can for the Smith family. But now what I want you to think about is, how do you feel about Mr. Jones on his third admission to the hospital for a heart problem? And how do you feel about Mrs. Smith? And are those feelings, those emotions, are they the same? Or are they different in some way? Are you angry? Are you feeling angry or sad or scared? What's going on with you emotionally in the way that you see those folks? Okay, we'll come back to that. Alcohol dependence is determined based on 11 criteria. And if you have more than 2 or 3, then you're mild and so forth. And you don't need to know any of that. You do not need to know any of that. You can, and it's okay. But here's what you and I, as a pastor, need to know. Am I seeing some kind of pattern of problems associated with the use of alcohol or any drug? Is the person warped? I can guarantee you this alcoholic was warped. Am I seeing some kind of pattern of problems? And the reasoning behind this is simple. If the person has control, they don't get into a pattern of problems. So that brings us to our next issue, which is, when you're on the outside looking in, what you're seeing is the pattern of problems. When you're on the inside looking out, what you're seeing is challenge with being able to consistently control your use of the drug. It's not total loss of control. It's the loss of consistency in control. So here was a university student. I'd done an eval on him. I said, well, John, I think you need to get into residential treatment for a few weeks. He says, oh, come on, Otto, it's not that bad. I don't get drunk every time I drink. I said, well, geez, John, nobody's perfect. Of course you don't get drunk every time you drink. It's not consistent loss. It is loss of consistency in control. That's what probably most of you can do and what I can't is consistently control. You control your use of a drug like alcohol the way I control my eating of sweet corn. I love corn on the cob. I've had my 1 ear of corn on the cob and I'm done. There's no question about control. It is easy for me to be in control because I don't even have to think about it. 1 ear of corn and I love it. And that's all I need. That's the difference on the inside, is the loss of consistency and control. Okay, we're going back to logic again. What's wrong with Aaron? Aaron was a supervisor with a company here in Lincoln. Good mother to 2 kids. She also had 3 charges for driving while intoxicated. Okay, she meets that criterion. That's a pattern of problems for sure. Well, how would that happen? How would it happen that a person would get into that kind of pattern of problems? Well, her theory was that it was bad luck. And as you can guess, I didn't buy into that theory very long. Said, no, Aaron, I'll tell you what, I'll let you get away with 1 drunk driving charge on bad luck. But after that, not so. Because once you've been charged with drunk driving, even if your lawyer gets you off, it still costs you hundreds or thousands of dollars. There's lots of inconvenience. You'd have to take time off work. You go to classes. There's a whole bunch of stuff you have to do. So anybody that has that happen once, they're not going to let it happen again. So we're done with bad luck by the time we get to the second part of the pattern. Maybe she was no longer grounded in reality. Heck, she didn't know if she had tickets for a football game or tickets for drunk driving. All right. Obviously not the case. She was well grounded in reality. we could explain this by saying Aaron was an outlaw. She didn't care about the laws. She didn't care about other people's safety or her own safety. She was just going to do what she wanted when she wanted to, and she was out there she didn't care. Well, obviously, Erin was a supervisor with a company. She was a good mother to 2 kids. She's not an outlaw. She's a responsible adult in other parts of her life. Well, maybe she was just a slow learner. You know, most people could catch on after 1 or 2. Maybe she was going to take her 5, 6, or 7. Well, she was really a pretty bright person. So that didn't explain the problem. What would explain it? Well, maybe she had a disease. We're just doing logic now. Maybe there was something going on, not in the prefrontal cortex where people make their decisions, but back here in another part of the brain that was not able to manage use of a drug like alcohol, pleasure-giving drugs. And this is a big trick for a lot of people who are alcohol or drug dependent. They feel like my brain is this part, just the prefrontal lobes, just the part where I do my thinking. They do not reckon with the fact that there are other organs in the brain. In fact, many other organs. The science that began to help us understand the disease was that science began as many years ago. I think it was in the last, well into the last century, and done in Scandinavia, where children of alcoholics, depending on some other factors, had 2 to 4 times the rate of alcoholism as others. Now, what made this important was that this science said these were children who were not raised by their alcoholic parents. They were adopted out, they were raised by non-alcoholic parents. This was what was telling us that there's something genetic seriously going on here. That's where disease science started, and it's gone a long way since then. Okay, so we're talking about it, the logic and the sense of understanding this is a disease, but there's also a lot of choice making involved. And that's where, pastors and other people will say, you're going to say, but if we say the person has a disease, doesn't that let them off the hook of personal responsibility? They acted like a jerk and they were under the influence, and now all we can say is, poor baby, you have a disease? Well, I worked in treatment for probably 40 years, and I've been in recovery in a 12-step movement for over 50, and I've never heard anybody say to somebody who was struggling, poor baby, you have a disease. Well, maybe an AA sponsor might say that, but they're being sarcastic. Anyway, it does make sense to say, look, there's got to be some choice making involved, because if you gave a person the choices like this guy has, either to die or to drink, most people are going to say, I guess I'll give up drinking for a while. Okay? But notice how decision is involved in other chronic diseases. It's involved in diabetes, many cancers, hypertension, very much a lot of choice making is involved there. And people really can get this. I don't make decisions in this organ here that control my pancreas. Something else is in control of that and decides how to submit the various kinds of digestive chemicals into my system. Even many cancers are lifestyle, that is, they're choice-making related. Now, let's go back to heart patients for a minute. Heart patients are responsible, that is, they make choices about whether they smoke or not, what kind of exercise they do, if any, how they manage their hypertension, how they manage their diet. There's a lot of choice making that goes into heart disease, as well as a lot of genetics. So this is where we say, okay, so you have a combination here, both of disease and decision, sin, if you will. That's how that works with heart patients, and that's how that works with other folks. Now, this is where I really get off on the idea of the disease, because having been sober for a while, if I don't have a disease, and I'm a much nicer guy now, I really should be able to consume a glass of wine once in a while, or, have a couple of beers while watching the Olympics. That's not the case. Absolutely not. If we think about it as being something like an allergy, it's not an allergy, but if it's something like an allergy, suppose somebody's allergic to strawberries. It would not make much sense to approach that person and say, when you eat strawberries, it makes you break out in a rash, makes you scratch and burn, makes you miserable, makes you kind of miserable to be around. I eat strawberries myself, but I made up my mind a long time ago that it's okay for me to eat strawberries, but it's not a good idea for me to have that rash. So get on top of this thing. Use your willpower. You can eat strawberries. Just stop having the rash. Doesn't make much sense, does it? Brother, sister, if you just had a closer walk with the Lord, I think you could handle your strawberry problem better. Well, I don't know if they need a closer walk with the Lord or not. They may well, but it's not going to affect their strawberry allergy very much, one way or the other. Nobody chooses to be an alcoholic. People do choose how they take care of themselves. They choose whether the price of recovery is worth it. And it's a difficult choice in the early stages. Because in the early stages of recovery, and I'll get into this later on, your capacity to feel ordinary pleasure is really limited. And your capacity to learn a different way of living without the drug being the center of your life is really difficult to take on. So the price of recovery, especially early on, is very high. So back to Mr. Jones, our heart patient, and Mrs. Smith, our alcoholic. If you said, yes, I think alcoholism is a disease, I wanted to test you on whether you really felt that way. Did you feel sad about them, angry with them, scared for them? And were your feelings about them pretty similar? Or do they contrast in some way? That's going to tell you whether you really think alcoholism is a disease or whether maybe you just thought you believed it was a disease. Okay. When it comes to dealing with folks with alcohol and drug issues, your view about whether that's a disease or a sin, or to what extent it's a disease or a sin, is not so important. What is important is the wisdom of Mr. Miyagi. Maybe you saw the original Karate Kid, maybe you didn't. But the Karate Kid gets beat up a lot, and Mr. Miyagi is the great guru, the great teacher of this martial art. And the kid always wants to learn more techniques. And Mr. Miyagi keeps saying, attitude. It is all about attitude. You must have the correct attitude. So Miyagi and the kid are out on the beach, and he's teaching him some techniques. They go back to his pickup truck to go home. And a couple of bully boys are standing next to the pickup truck, and they got their beer bottles sitting on the fender. And Mr. Miyagi very politely asked them if they will remove their bottles so that he and his young friend can be on their way. And the bully boys have some smart aleck answers for them, and they're not going to do anything. And they get more and more belligerent every time Mr. Miyagi politely asks them. And then suddenly one of them takes a swing, and suddenly there is a flurry of motion. And now we look, and the two bully boys are laying in the sand, and their beer bottles have gone flying. Mr. Miyagi and the Karate Kid are sitting in the pickup truck, and the kid's eyes are this big. Wow! How did you do that, Mr. Miyagi? I don't know, but I had the right attitude. It's not so important to what extent you think the disease is at work or that sin is at work. What's important is how our attitude is toward those people. Okay, and we have a blank screen. That's good. Now we're going to go on and talk a little bit more about addiction. What makes a drug of abuse? All right. Ibuprofen's okay, right? Opiates, not. Caffeine's okay. At least I hope it's okay. LSD, not. Antidepressants are okay. Cocaine is not. What makes those drugs drugs of abuse and the other drugs not? Now I'm going to try an experiment here and see if I can. Well, maybe I can't. Katie, can you break us into some small groups? Like, say, groups of 4 if you can. I'll stop share. How's that? Is that going to help anything?
Will do.
Okay, great.
Sorry, I had to.
And I'm going to say about, I don't know, let's say 4 minutes for this group if we can.
Do you think 4 groups seems good or 3?
4 in a group.
4 in a group. Okay.
Yeah, so we probably need, yeah, 7.
Maybe 6.
Yeah, 6 is fine.
We should.
1 minute to go. 1 minute to go. Oh. Okay. I think everybody's back. I hope everybody. Maybe I better wait another little few seconds here. Okay. What makes a drug of abuse? Almost always we'll come up with the word addiction. And while addiction is very common, that doesn't quite cover it. And this is what makes a drug of abuse. It has to make the person feel good. Might make them feel good by popping them up or mellowing them out, which is what I was always looking for. It might make them feel good by taking them to a strange place like an LSD might do. The drug also has to act fast. This, by the way, is why we are not concerned about mood-altering drugs like mood stabilizers that they use for bipolar disorder or antidepressants. Those are mood-altering drugs. But we're not concerned about them because they don't act fast. In fact, they act slowly. By the way, if you see a drug that has a street value, that's a dangerous drug. That's a drug of abuse. An antidepressant has no street value. Why? Because if the dealer comes along to say, here, take some of these, and in 8 days, you're going to feel average. That's not going to sell anywhere. So it's got to make me feel good. It's got to act fast. And then, of course, it has to do some kind of damage. Caffeine does create addiction. And in extreme cases, it can do some damage stomach, or it can, damage people's sleep and so on. But mostly it doesn't. And so mostly we're not too concerned about it. Treatment agents I worked for had a lot of soldiers. Soldiers were encouraged to use energy drinks loaded with caffeine and loaded with these other minor stimulants. And then they'd be awake half the night when they were in treatment, and then they couldn't sleep. And then they were sleepy during the day. So our boss just shut off all caffeine to patients, which did not make them happy. But it was what had to happen to get them back into a well-regulated space mentally. So they got to make me feel good, got to act fast to do that. Maybe a matter of minutes. Seconds is better. And they've got to do some kind of damage, psychologically, relationally, physically, but it's got to do something. And then the fourth thing is the trickster. which is somehow or other the drug has got to look safe. Now, I know nobody looks at methamphetamine and says, oh, this looks safe. Nobody looks at it that way, but they look at it and say, you know what? I'm smarter or stronger or better looking or something else that are luckier that makes it that something I can do and I can manage it. But somehow or other, it's got to look okay. As long as there's been beer and there's been Schultz's, there have been Schultz's drinking beer. And all the Schultz's I know that drank beer drank it responsibly, except one. This guy. Okay? It looked safe to me. If you're running with a crowd in your college group or your young men's group or your whatever that drinks a lot, it looks safe to you because it looks like everybody's doing it and it's okay. So it's like that. But those are the 4 characteristics of what makes a drug of abuse. Now, obviously, if it's physically addictive, as we just talked about, or as we are talking about, if it's physically addictive, all those things are going to be true. Okay? Addiction is a brain disease. This is Dr. Nora Volkoff. There's probably nobody who's done more to help us understand the nature of addiction as a brain disease than Dr. Volkoff. She's also, coincidentally, she is the great-granddaughter of Leon Trotsky, one of the founders of Russian communism. Anyway, she was the person who championed functional magnetic resonance imaging. Yes, I spent a little time learning that. fMRI research, where they were tracking things happening in the brain while it was happening. So this gave us a lot of information about alcoholism and other addictions being a brain disease. It's a brain disease because there's a big connection between pleasure, all those drugs make us feel good, and survival. And these drugs hijack that connection between pleasure and survival. Okay? The survival centers in the brain are closely connected to the pleasure circuits. This is why we eat food. This is why people in my time zone and the Eastern time zone are already feeling hungry, probably, because I feel bad, that is hungry, eat food, feel good. There's a strong connection between pleasure and what I need to do to survive. It's the same reason, this is why we have sex. I'm pretty sure that nobody in this meeting said to themselves at some point in their life, it is my duty to the species to go forth and find a partner with whom I might couple so that we could procreate and thus continue the survival of our species. I'm really pretty sure that's not the way that worked. Attraction, intense excitement, sexual excitement, romantic excitement, pleasure just being in the company of another person. Those are things that brought us together so that we might procreate and continue the survival of the species. So this is all I'm saying is that pleasure and survival are closely integrated. This is also why, by the way, this guy overeats, because it still feels good even if I don't need it for survival. Oh, well. The drugs that we're talking about all hijack that connection. And this will help if you don't have, if why a person is an addict makes no sense to you, I understand, but it's because addicts feel a need for the drug for their survival. Now, this is totally irrational because it's not taking place in the rational part of the brain. It's taking place back here in the survival centers. It feels like I have to have this to survive. Addicts also lose, because we keep overstimulating these pleasure chemicals in the brain, then we lose our capacity to feel pleasure at other times. So we might experience that as being more easily bored. and we most certainly experience it as being more negative about life. Early recovery looks, for many of us, looks a lot like depression. We've robbed our brain of its capacity to generate those ordinary pleasure-giving chemicals. And so we lose a lot of our capacity to feel normal interest and normal pleasure. Some people, this will be completely recovered. For most of us, it will certainly be mostly recovered. For some people, it is difficult for this capacity to experience normal levels of pleasure at all, to kind of burned it all out. But that's another way of looking at why is it so difficult to change out of an addiction. And this is after you get through all the detox and the horrors of those things. It's still there. You still have these kinds of, in a sense, it's a longer term element of the detoxification. Well, now we'll come to our topic, folks. This is spiritual dependency. As a recovering alcoholic, I had a lot of problem trying to explain to people why it is, if we're saying you have this physical disease, this difference in the way your brain works, how is it that we think you need to be engaged in a spiritual program? The practices of 12-step recovery are a spiritual program. How is it we say that what you need is to be engaged in a spiritual program for recovery? And I can tell you, as a chaplain in a treatment program, lots of people would tell me, I'm not a spiritual person. What I think they meant is they don't believe in God, or they've got nothing to do with religion. I would have to reason with them that spirituality is not so much about religion, though religion helps many people spiritually. A spiritual person, and now, what do we think of typically? I think when we think of a spiritual person, that's a person who's devout, a person who's very kind and gives of themselves to other people, a person who's connected with nature, or spends time in spiritual practices like reading and reading scriptures and praying and meditating and so forth. But I'm going to argue, my boss said I should not use that word. I should say, I'm going to reason that spirituality is something that is a characteristic of everybody. So just bear with me for the sake of this discussion, because remember, where I come from is dealing with people who say, I'm not spiritual. And I would say, yes, you are. Why is that? I would say they're spiritual because they have some kind of values. I may think their values stink, but everybody has some kind of values. The person who was hijacking the airplane there in the earlier photo, person has values. I don't like them. I think they're wrong, but they think some of my values are wrong. That's part of spirituality. Another part is basic beliefs about life. Life stinks and then you die. All right, that's a spiritual belief. Again, it's a really bad spiritual belief. It's one I encountered a lot in working with new people to recovery. That depressed view of life affected their belief system. Everybody has a need for purpose. Either you experience a purpose or you have a need for purpose in your life. And if you have the need for purpose and you don't experience it, you're probably pretty miserable. Everybody has a need for a sense of purpose, and everybody has a need for connection. Connection to one another, connection to the world around us, and connection to something greater than we are. In religion, we feel like we have some ways of defining that something greater more precisely, but everybody has a need for that kind of connection. Okay, so when I think of what we usually talk about as a spiritual person, to me, that's a person who's practicing positive spirituality. Whether we're practicing positive spirituality or negative spirituality, everybody's spiritual. I ask, when I would talk to clients, I would say, and I would show a sort of classic picture of a devil character. I don't want to get into an argument about whether the devil is a real being or not, but everybody knows when you show a devil character what that is. And it was a devil or Satan, spiritual. You bet. Really bad spiritual. Okay. Now, what happens in a dependency is the same thing that happens in a relationship with any false god. This is what's going on here spiritually. The drug becomes the god of the person's life. Most people who use a pleasure-giving drug, a drug like alcohol, simply use it as a reward. It is merely one of the nice things they do for themselves. All right, you can bounce a baby on your knee, you can watch a sunset, you can play pickleball, you can have a couple of cold cans of beer watching the Olympics. It's just one of many nice things that give you pleasure, one of many payoffs. What happens is that the drug infiltrates the reward system and then becomes the reward. So here's a guy new in treatment. I often asked, what do you like to do for fun? And he said he loved to fish. I do not like fish. I don't like to eat fish. I don't like to be around fish. I don't want to catch fish. I don't want to clean fish. Just really bad for me. So he is nuts about it. And off he goes telling me all about fishing. Well, when was the last time you actually went fishing? Caught him short. Well, I think it's about 3 or 4 years ago. I said, whoa, what happened to fishing? You're crazy about fishing. What happened to it? He really didn't know the answer. A few weeks later, he gained some insight into his dependency on alcohol. He said, you know what happened to fishing? What happened was, we always took some drinks with us. Then it got to be where we took lots of drinks with us. And then it got to be actually where all we were doing was taking our fishing poles along on our drinking trips. And then one stormy, rotten Saturday, we looked out the window of the lodge and said, hey, it's miserable out there. Let's have a few drinks and wait for it to clear off. He said, I don't know if it ever cleared off that day or not, because that's the last time I went fishing 3 or 4 years ago. The drug was what it was all about. It gets worse. The drug becomes what makes life meaningful. I'm depending now on the drug to manage my emotions. I called my sponsor. I've been sober about a week or two. I called my sponsor 10 o'clock one morning. I said, Bob, I don't know what to do now. I feel like drinking. And Bob said, well, Otto, you're an alcoholic, I said, yeah, I know. Well, that's kind of how it works with us. We feel like drinking. That's how it goes, I said, oh, you're a big help. I said, you don't understand, Bob. It's 10 in the morning. I never drank at 10 in the morning. I drank at 10 at night. I was a pastor. I had to make calls. I had stuff to do in the evenings. He said, yeah, but you started to think about drinking at 10 in the morning. Well, see, he was right. I didn't drink all day. I didn't drink every day. But many days, the events of my day were cross-referenced with thoughts, plans, feelings about the drug that I used. Alcohol was in the middle of my day, whether I used it or not. And this gets worse. Notice that the slide is really bumpy. It's actually a lot bumpier than that. And you'll have rises and so forth. And it may take a year, as it can for somebody who's young or somebody who's old like me. If I started drinking, if I was new to drinking and started drinking, I could go down the slide very quickly. But the drug then becomes what makes life worth living. This is where we see people pushing other values to the outside of their life. Their work, their family, their faith. Things keep getting pushed away because the drug is what makes life worth living. And then we get to the point where the drug becomes what makes life bearable. It's not fun anymore. If I don't take a few hits off the pipe, I'm never going to make it to school in the morning. If I don't have a couple of Valium in my system, I'm not going to make it to work in the morning. I know better than to drink before I go in, so I take a different kind of drug that they can't smell so easily. but I cannot manage without the drug. And ultimately, we get to premature death. I am told that active alcoholics and addicts die about 20 years before their time. Now, I don't know what kind of commitment your church may have asked you to make to your God. Mine said, would you be willing to give up everything, even your very life, for the sake of the Lord? It is the sort of commitment that a religion will ask its adherents to make to its God. Subconsciously, alcoholics and addicts make that kind of commitment to their God, small g. This is why we talk about this being a spiritual issue. Yes, it's medical. Yes, it's physical and it's emotional, but it is also spiritual. The drug becomes the God of the person's life. It becomes their higher power in 12-step language. Okay, you guys have been good. Let's take about a 5-minute break. So it is now, according to this clock, 11:53, and this old man needs a little break. 11:54, so at 11:59 Central Time, but 1 minute before the hour, we'll be back to work here, okay? So take a stretch break. And
No.
hello.
No, I'm okay. Just 1 second. I'm in a webinar on break.
Wondering about having tomorrow late morning.
Yeah, that should work.
That works.
Yeah, and actually it's quick because I want to, they're all great. But I couldn't find the mute button, so the instructor came back when we started talking. I want to talk about a bed roll for him. But, you know.
Actually, if you got questions or comments you want to make now, it's an okay time to do it. I think I can unmute you. or you maybe can unmute yourself.
It's kind of a curiosity as to what
Yeah.
other people do, but I'm in discernment for the diaconate. I've asked a number of clergy. I get different answers depending on who I'm asking. But for congregants who are in recovery, what do they do and how do they offer the common cup with wine? Number one, and then for clergy who are expected to dispose of the wine after service, what do they do there? Because effectively, if you're a congregant, you have to out yourself before you go up for communion, which can be a major point of tension, I think, during the liturgy. So
Yeah.
I'm always curious about that.
Now, of course, it depends on your religious tradition, because for some, it absolutely has to be wine.
Right.
One of the options is intinction. So you do intinction prior to the, like the night before. So by the time you're serving somebody, the intincted wafer the alcohol is gone. You can also put a drop of wine because the amount of wine is irrelevant. So you can put a drop or 3 drops of wine into a chalice with water. And so that's low enough. It's just not going to trigger anything in somebody's head. Of course, in our church, they just routinely announce the red liquid is wine,
Right.
the white liquid is, and there's a lot of other people, not just alcoholics, who prefer to take the grape juice.
Right. Yeah. I'm Episcopalian. We offer grape and they're very clear. So we're lucky, but I visit other churches and they're not. And so it really is, the onus is on the congregant who's living with addiction to out themselves. And then and the other flip sided, I've been thinking about this as myself as potentially a deacon. You're expected to dispose of the elements after everything is done.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, what am I going to do? Because I can't drink it. I won't drink it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
We
other Episcopalian here, Episcopal
please,
priest
yes.
here, you should have what's called a piscina, which is a way of disposing wine directly to the ground.
Right.
As part of the setup for your altar guild. And it's if I have elements that I don't want to dispose of myself, I leave them on the altar very carefully. And that's a conversation, and like in a specific way. And that's a conversation I could have with my altar guild. That's definitely within our tradition. Sorry to jump in. I just want to,
No, that's fine. That's great. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
There's lots of options and lots of people in recovery, and lots of clergy in recovery, Eucharistic ministers in recovery in the Episcopal Church. So there are lots of options.
Right. Unfortunately, we had a bishop a number of years ago actually involved in a fatality that was alcohol related. And so
you're from Maryland.
that's sort of like the American example, I guess, of which raised awareness around recovery and issues and such. So that's very much on our radar at the cathedral where I serve. So we have a lot of support for sobriety ministries and alternatives and such. But I know that's not true writ large. So it's good to have these conversations.
Yes.
I also find that post-COVID, a lot of people aren't taking the wine anyway, so it's not obvious why.
And our bishop, we're not allowed to intinct. So it's either, but we understand that if you've taken communion in one form, you've taken it in both. So that's fine. And some places, I visited one church that actually stopped and did the they stopped for each of the people, even if their arms are crossed and they weren't taking wine, as if they were going to take it, and gave them a chance to honor the cup, which I thought was wonderful and inclusive.
Okay. And well, you guys can see each other's names, so I'll bet you can look each other up if you want to have more conversation. And of course, I'm from a Lutheran perspective, I can visit about this, but we're not as well, at least I'm not. No, but we're not quite as strict in our liturgical practices, I think, as Episcopalians are. Stephanie's giving the big nod on that.
True
Yeah.
story. True story. I know my Lutheran colleagues just think we're a little off the wall sometimes, but that's all right.
Okay, so for our last 25 minutes or so, I want to talk about codependency, partly because we will often find someone with a high level of codependency associated with somebody with an alcohol or drug problem, or a criminal for that matter. And also because codependency is rampant among clergy. So I'm hoping this is helpful to you personally, many of us. And I often introduce myself in 12-step meetings. I'm Otto, and I'm an alcoholic in recovery and a codependent in partial recovery, because I still make this very mistake, which is to take on responsibilities that belong to somebody else. Anytime I hold you responsible for a choice of mine, I'm being codependent. Anytime I hold me responsible for a choice of yours, I'm being codependent. So, simple definition is misplaced responsibility. Robert Frost, over 100 years ago, told us good fences make good neighbors. This is really about having good boundaries. I'm going to try this one a little differently. I would like for, I'm just going to pick on somebody to do this. I would like somebody to be an inviter and somebody else to be an invitee. And you'll unmute and do this in front of everybody. Well, don't worry about it. You can't screw it up. Inviter, all I want you to do is to invite this other person to get some kind of help. Give your reasons for it. And it can be any kind of help. It can be going to a Bible class. It can be going to a 12-step group. It could be coming with you to the gym. It could be going to a diet center. I don't care. You're just going to be inviting this other person to some kind of help. Now, this is made up. This isn't like you for real and them for real. This is just made up, okay? But you're going to invite that person to some kind of help. And the other person, the invitee, don't say yes and don't say no. You can delay, you make excuses, talk about how it didn't work before, you can tell lies. We're only going to run this for less than a minute. So I just want a volunteer to be the inviter, please. Okay, Melanie is on for being the inviter, and we need one volunteer to be the invitee. This is the easy job. You know how people, come on, you're asking people to do things all the time and they give you excuses, tell lies, make up stuff, delay, right? So did I see Melissa raise her hand? Yes. Okay. So go ahead and, go ahead and unmute. And we may want to, it's a little hard to see your whole face because you're way down at the bottom of your screen there. So, yeah, there we go. So Melanie, go ahead and invite Melissa. You're just making this up here to some kind of help.
Melissa, I want to invite you to a Bible study. I know that you're going through some tough things right now, and I thought it might be helpful for you.
Well, I'm having a lot of trouble reading with, I have old glasses and I'm having trouble reading. I'm not sure that would be very comfortable for me.
Well, you don't have to be able to read. You don't even have to bring a Bible. And you don't have to talk. We'll do all that for you. We'll make it as easy as we can for you.
But, I don't have a whole lot of time. My mornings are busy, my afternoons are busy, and most of the evenings I have something to do. I'm not sure I can squeeze that in.
Well, I'm hearing you say that you don't really want to do this, but what I want to throw out to you is we have 3 different groups that meet at 3 different times. And I'll bet one of them would fit in with your schedule.
You know, I don't know. I've had trouble with churches before. They've just been church people are just they've been mean to me. I don't know.
Wow.
Oh, okay, okay. Now, just raise your hands. How many of you think Melanie was successful? Yeah, Dave's been through this, he knows. Okay. Melanie was absolutely successful. Go look at the screen again. What was her assignment? The first word
Invite.
is invite. Did you invite? Of course you did. Now, if I'm codependent in my thinking, I think, no, my job was to get Melissa to accept. But that wasn't the assignment, nor is it the assignment we have from God. Our job is to invite, our job is to proclaim, our job is to share. In Christian circles, we will say it's the work of the Spirit to do otherwise. Okay, so this is misplaced responsibility. See where we're headed there? Jerry bought Katie some new jewelry. Well, that's not codependent. That was a nice thing to do in order to cheer her up. Oops. See, Jerry now has expectations for how Katie should respond. Yeah. Then she stayed depressed, she stayed sad, and that ruined his day. So now he let her feelings and her stuff determine how he felt. That's misplaced responsibility, feeling responsible for her choices, letting her be responsible for his. All right, or making her. So in treatment, we would always talk about, because our folks, especially the guys, had very little connection with their own emotional content. So we broke the thousands of human nuances of emotion into about 5 or 6 big groups. And then we'd say, what is your feeling? And they would struggle like mad over it. So that's why there's only just a few big feelings up here. But in healthy feelings, fear is a healthy feeling, keeps me out of trouble. Worry, there's 2 kinds of worry. One is I can fear my own future fears today. The other one is I can fear your fears for you. That's codependent fear. Fear, I'm so scared you're going to wind up in jail. That's not for me to be afraid of. That's for you to be afraid of. Anger can be a really healthy thing, helps me protect my boundaries. Becomes resentment, literally to refeel the anger. Why is that? Because I think it's up to me to get you to do the things you need to do, and I'm so darn mad at you because you're not doing them. And so I refeel that anger and I lug that anger around with me. Sadness and hurt become self-pity. Ain't it awful that a swell guy like me can't get you to do the things you need to do? Shame and guilt become toxic shame, which is self-hatred. I must be bad, weak, terrible as a spouse, a child, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a good friend. I can't get you to do the right thing. I can't get you to give up this jug. I can't get you to do stuff. And the we lumped all the positive feelings into one word, glad. And that becomes false pride, because sometimes I actually do manipulate you into doing what you need to do. It. Boy, it must be something then, right? What happens, of course, is a person gets overloaded with these emotions. Because when one anger is refelt 50 times, it feels like 50 angers. When one piece of guilt gets refelt 50 times, it feels like 50 pieces of guilt, and so on. So the feelings become overwhelming. And at some point I say, fine, I don't give a darn, you can just go to prison. Which obviously I'm overwhelmed with feeling when I say that. Now, anybody who comes to a seminar like this is a responsible, caring person. And if you're a responsible, caring person, at least once in a while, you're going to fall into the ditch just like this bicyclist did. Some people live in the ditch of codependency, and it is overwhelming. So when you may find this true for you, but you will certainly find it true for family members of folks with an alcohol or drug issue, or criminality, actually, where they are just overwhelmed with that because they just can't get that other person to change. It's overwhelming because we're not God. Now, this is my personal belief, so if you're different, that's terrific, but I think that's the original sin. The serpent said, hey, you want to be like God? I got just the tool for you. Almighty God does not take responsibility for other people's choices. The God we believe in, who is all loving, does not take responsibility for our choices. God does not lay awake at night. I know I'm being anthropomorphic, but God does not lay awake at night worrying about why Schultz never really catches on that God is going to take care of him. God sleeps well because God is not codependent. And if I'm putting pressure on myself to be responsible for another person's choices, I'm putting pressure on myself that the almighty, all-loving being does not put on himself or herself. No wonder it feels overwhelming when I'm taking responsibility, when I'm being codependent with other people. I'm putting pressure on myself that God doesn't put on God's self. Well, parents will say, and I used to for about 6 months, I ran the family workshop. I did a lot of family work as a chaplain and as an intervention counselor. And parents would come into our family program and say, but I am responsible for my child. Yeah, but you're not responsible for your child's choices. You ever try to feed a little baby that didn't want to be fed? Even the little baby has choices. Okay? Parents would say, but I'm responsible for raising a good child. And I would say, no, you're not. You're responsible for being a good parent. That's what you can be. Now, this is really difficult for people to get because we have all kinds of messages that say, no, you're responsible for raising a good child. No, you're not. You're responsible for being a good parent, to be the best parent you know how to be. And I dealt with folks, and probably a lot of you have too, who do a wonderful job of parenting. They just have a kid who's doing a lousy job of childing. That's all. And a lot of those kids turn out okay later on. Maybe not till their 20s or 30s or 40s, but they turn out okay later on. Now, obviously, if we take 1,000 parents who are doing a really good job of parenting, we're going to see a lot more good kids come out of that group than we see of 1,000 parents who do a lousy job of parenting. Nevertheless, what we hold ourselves accountable for is being good parents. And that's why parents need parent support groups a lot of times when they have difficult children, because I need to get feedback from somebody else that tells me I'm okay. Not, And that's my parents had parent support group. Of course, they never called it that. This is the 50s. My parents had parent support group. And as they hung out with people who had children of similar ages. And then they would compare notes. And they would share with each other, and they'd support each other, and they'd even make referrals. I like to eat salt pellets out of the water softener. And Mrs. Schmidt said to my mom, maybe you should take him to Dr. Walker and see if there's something wrong. See, they were good parents. When we intervene with people, is that codependent? It all depends. What's my attitude? If my attitude is, I've said and done the things I can do, good boy, Otto. That's not codependent. If my attitude is, now I've said these wonderful things to you, how do you respond? And I gotta wait to see how you respond. Now I'm being codependent. Whether you respond the way I want you to or not, I'm still being codependent. And so next week, I think it's next week, we'll be talking about the actual flashing your bright stuff, which is how I shine light into the darkness in somebody else's darkness and be content with the fact that I let not my light so shine, but God's light so shine into their darkness. Okay, look at the spiritual slide. What do you see that's different from that of the chemically dependent? Not a thing. Because spiritually speaking, in codependency, if we're codependent on somebody with a substance use disorder that is progressing down the slide, who better than some nice codependent guy like me, while they're throwing away one responsibility after another, for me to go pick up one responsibility after another. So yes, we pay his bills, but we don't give him money for the drugs. Honest, people would tell me that. Well, you know, he doesn't spend your money on the drugs. He doesn't have to. He can spend other money on the drugs. They go down the same slide and get emotionally just as wrapped up and just as sick and just as overwhelmed in many ways as the person with the dependency. So it's controlling the other person becomes the reward. Controlling the other person becomes what makes life meaningful, makes life worth living, gets to be a greater and greater preoccupation, because if they're going down the slide getting worse and worse, I go down the slide with them, getting more and more codependent, even to the point of being miserable, and even to the point of making myself physically sick. All those things happen. This is a terrible joke. What happens to a deeply codependent person just before they die? Someone else's life passes before their eyes. That's a codependent at the very bottom. Okay. What's recovery from codependency? How did recovery from codependency get started? It got started with a group called Alanon. That is the group for families and friends of alcoholics. The story I know is that Lois Wilson, the wife of the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, saw somebody who was waiting for her husband to come out of their AA group. And she went over to that lady and said, "Are you just as mad as I am?" "I sure am." And they got together and started caring for each other. And they adopted almost exactly the same 12 steps. There's a little change in the 12th step. But the first step that says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable was the same for the Alanon. Because they're just as powerless over that other person's drinking as he or she is. And trying to get control of that person or that alcohol use is just as challenging and just as impossible for them. And so consequently, their life becomes unmanageable. What is recovery about then? It's really recovery from a relationship with a false God. Anytime I had trouble working with somebody on step 2 and 3 in AA, which the step 2 is, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And step 3 made a decision to turn our life and our will over to the care of God as we understood God. Anytime I had trouble with somebody getting those steps, the problem was almost always back on that first step. If I don't recognize the relationship I had with a false God, a false higher power that promised to restore me to sanity, that promised to take care of me, but betrayed that promise and betrayed me. If I'm not getting that part, I'm in no position to start working with the God of my understanding or good higher powers to help me put life together again. Oh my goodness. We can't be finished with me yammering and lecturing early. So this is a good time for questions and comments. We got a couple minutes here. I know, yeah, you guys want to go to lunch, so who's going to say anything, right? But please do. Oops. What did I do? Want to make sure you get your money's worth. There's everybody. Questions, comments, snide remarks? Yeah, Jerry. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, Otto. I just am intrigued by what you said about does your faith community ask you to give up your very life even? And just wanted to use the word resurrection in this context, because we do, give up our life, but there is, eternal life. There's life after. There is, and that's part of the recovery too, that isn't easily understood at the beginning, but which comes further on down the road.
They're really a recovery, a 12-step recovery is really strong, I think, on death and resurrection. I don't want to say motif, that sounds too light, but it's really just big on death and resurrection. Alcoholics in long-term recovery understand resurrection in this life. And biblical references about though I was dead, now I'm alive, and so forth. It comes out very practically in 12-step recovery. Someone else, comment, question? I should have said nobody's going to be allowed to leave until we have another question or something. That would.
Melinda has her hand.
Melinda.
Okay, Melinda, yay.
Hi. This is wonderful. Yeah, the 12 steps, just very briefly, it just is so important. When I talk to my students about it in a class on philosophy and some certain scriptural texts, that idea of self-examination and transformation. The course is actually called Journey of Transformation. So it really is so wonderful. But what I wanted to just bring up, and what I really appreciate, is the idea that you said addicts feel they need the drug for survival. People don't understand this.
Yeah.
This is what people did not understand about my son, that he was not able to choose. He was, and he would tell me I'm on autopilot, but everyone else said, well, if he loved us, he would stop, and they didn't understand people need to understand the unique nature of this suffering. It's very hard for us to imagine what it feels like to be in that desperation, that you feel like you're not going to survive unless you use again. And so this is something this is so important, and I really appreciate you putting it in these terms. It really is helpful for me.
How is it that a mother, I'm thinking specific instance, a mother deserts her infant to go find more methamphetamine?
Right.
Okay, now apart from how morally reprehensible that is, this is a core survival drive.
Right.
Even old men, when they're around babies, you watch our faces change. I mean, this is just built into us. Oh, it's old, you don't hear me talking that way to anybody else. And to a young mother, I think it's a huge survival drive, and it's overwhelmed by that. Not making excuses. I'm just saying it's overwhelmed by that.
No, I think it's so important for us to understand that, so that for the addicted person to know that we understand that part of it, I think that can do so much to help them feel connected, to feel seen, and that can help them start to make a turn. I don't even know the words exactly to use, but because this is so unique and so difficult, this disease. But thank you very much.
Yeah, Melanie?
Yes, to everything you just said. I think that the hardest thing for a person like myself, I have family members who are alcoholics, and I can't understand what they're going through. So what I need to do is do my best to learn, and then to just acknowledge, I don't know what you're going through. I can't understand. But what I do know is that, whatever it is that I can glean from these types of experiences that we're having now, so that I can try to have a better understanding. But I think that is the biggest challenge, is to gain some measure of understanding. But like I said, I can't actually understand, but I can try. And I think sometimes just the acknowledgement is that we don't know.
And you can be a darn good therapist with alcoholics without being one. I worked with a score of excellent therapists, and you can be a terrible therapist and be an alcoholic in recovery. The big thing about, and this is a psychiatrist named Harry Tiebout in 1940 said, these guys in AA can identify at depth and confront at depth. And that's where, when you're saying I don't understand, yes, you can understand it, but this sort of identify and confront at depth is something that people in recovery can offer, that's difficult for others. It is now 12:30. I don't know if we're going to get cut off by Zoom. I'm happy to hang out with anybody who wants to visit some more. I'm also happy to bless you as you go on your way, and bless the world that you bless, and let everybody go who wants to go and needs to go. But if anybody wants to stay and chat, I can hang out for a little bit yet. So
I have to run, but thank you very, very much.
okay.
I'm going to be leaving soon, but I just wanted to say thank you again. This has really been helpful. And Cindy, you'll be taking the training, but this isn't quite what you'll get in the training, right? So I'm talking about the iThirst
Oh, yeah.
initiative training. I knew Keaton, and I was involved in this before there was a training, and that's so when she, we tried to get her here on campus, and then we brought her into the continuing ed school so that they could create a curriculum for this. So that's why you have that. But this is just before or after. I think this is just so helpful. It's so important for us to try to understand this from the inside, because you're right, we can't know how it feels. Living with someone very closely, you see a lot. So, you don't go through it actually yourself, but you see a lot and recognize a lot that the rest of the world doesn't see. And I don't mean to go on and on, but I just wanted to say one thing. What I do with my students is have them get together with people in recovery, and so that the people in recovery tell their stories to them, so they begin to be listeners. And I think that's one thing that my son needed. People willing to just people not in the rooms of he liked to go to AA meetings, even though it was opioids for him.
Right.
Because he felt that usually in those groups, people had more years of recovery, but he needed to be listened to by people who are outside, people who are outside of the rooms, the rest of us that don't really understand. He really needed those people to say, I'm interested in knowing your story, and that's really why I do what I do, because I felt that he was living in another world, and the rest of the world, he was living in a world of people who are not normal,
And lots
So,
of us,
yeah.
lots of us especially in early recovery, you go to residential treatment, and then maybe you're intensive outpatient, and then you're in AA meetings, and maybe you're in AA meetings 4, 5, 6 times a week. And people will say, hey, I think you're addicted to AA. And they say, yeah, but they're not dying. Because sometimes a person needs to be in an incubator.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And so, you surround yourself with people who are on the same journey. And but eventually you should develop out of that. Some people
Right.
do, but yeah.
I felt that it was painful for him that, they like family and friends and people would just kind of like move away from him because, he just, they blamed him in a lot of ways, Yeah. So that's something we have to change.
We have a
Cindy.
program called Open Table, Open Door, Open Table. And there's 5 or 6 women on each table, and we go through a training program. And then we meet with a woman who is coming out of recovery, who has gone through recovery and is coming out. So it's a companion program also. And we meet with her once a week for 1 hour for 1 year. And it is incredible. The connection that we make, and we're all strangers. None of us know each other until we come into that table. It's beautiful, and it makes such a difference to all of us. I mean, to all of us.
Is this in your parish, or is this
no, it's a nonprofit that Tammy Fowler, who is the one who connected with Keaton Douglas for iThirst, that will be through the diocese. It will be available to anybody, but it's within the diocese. Open Door is outside of the diocese, and it's actually based on a model. They licensed the model that they used for a homeless population. So they created this model, this group created this model, and it's all over the country. And Tammy heard about that and licensed the model to help with addiction, and also in the prison industry as well, women who are coming out of prison. So Yeah, it's been wonderful, and I thirst will just, it's a spiritual, that is
Mm.
the spiritual component
Right.
of it, or the
And it's about
more so.
companionship.
It's about
That's what we
connection.
do.
Yeah, they're all about connection. We've
Mhm.
lost those connections.
Yeah,
And my niece felt so isolated.
alone. Yes,
And
yeah,
a lot of the times it's because you're honoring the family. You think you're honoring the family's privacy. They tend to push you away, and they want to isolate. They've had enough of people knowing everything about their lives going on, as it goes on. At least that was the way in my brother's family. And it's just such a struggle for them when you feel so
Oh,
alone
yeah, yes,
and trapped anyway, and then you have nobody
right, yeah.
around you to love you. It's
Mhm.
just
The
so
shame
sad
and the
to me.
stigma. Yeah, yeah. My son used to say to me, I'm so lonely.
Oh,
So,
so sad.
yeah.
Well, it's
But
healing
anyway,
also for us. It's healing for us who have gone through it.
yeah,
Because in your class, this codependency and that information that you've given
mm,
us is so powerful, because you ask yourself, is there something else I could have done? I mean, as Christians, we say, well, you can always do something else, but that you can always love a little more. But it's about, did I do enough? I could always do more, but did I do enough?
Mhm.
And then I can release that, that
Yeah.
ache in your heart, So
Yeah,
yeah,
this
it's
is
all
why you
about
want,
connection.
this is why you want to talk to another person.
mm,
When you're on a staff, you staff with
Yeah.
the verb. And you talk about, well, this is our plan, this is what we're doing, this is what I said, this is what happened, and so on. But you do those, you're using, instead of an impossible standard of codependency, you're using the standard of your peers as your measuring stick. And then you learn, and then you do better the next time.
yeah.
And that's, yeah.
Well,
I
I
think,
just thank you both so much. I've learned so
yeah,
much in this first session, and I'm looking forward to the next one. And I've taken it every time I see something like this, I take it in preparation for I Thirst and then working in our
Mhm.
parish. So it's
you're going to
so
be very prepared, very well prepared,
yeah.
especially that you're working on this open doors. Is that, if I wanted to Google it, what would I Google? Open door?
You would Google Open Door Women's Recovery Alliance. You know what? I'll send you the link.
Yeah, you can text it, right? Because I sent you my phone.
I will. You gave me your phone number. Okay, I'll do that. Yeah. All right.
All
Thank you
right.
both
Thanks
so
so much.
much.
Thank you.
All
See
right,
you
thank
next.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Any further conversation? And we will say goodbye.